So day 18 of our PMP6 exam prep step by step. Today we'll be continuing on the risk management knowledge area. We have looked at quite a few processes in our last session on the risk management when we started. We started with a plan. We looked at identify risks, how we identify risks, and we looked at the qualitative risk analysis, which, as we have said then, is really the first level of risk analysis. Many of the projects will stop at qualitative risk analysis, but many large projects, complex projects, will move on with one step further and go into the quantitative risk analysis, which is numerical based and a little more detailed, and it can handle complex scenarios. So quantitative risk analysis, when we look at it as a process, we see the inputs are project management plan. Now, in terms of project documents, you will find that there are risk register, there will be and in the risk register, we would have captured many of the things that we have done in the qualitative risk analysis. As a process, we look at different tools that we use, and then what it will again do as output is updating many of those documents, like risk register and so on. Now, quantitative risk analysis, it is, as you have said, or even the name suggests, it's a numerical analysis. And numerical analysis, in this numerical analysis, we try to find out the combined effect on overall project objectives. And as you have said, in overall project objectives, it comes from not only the individual project objectives, but there can be some other sources. And in fact, it is the numerical, the quantitative risk analysis is the only way you can effectively come up with a risk analysis for an overall project objectives. It provides quantitative risk information for planning, so it is much more precise than what we have seen in the qualitative risk analysis, and it is required for robust risk planning. Now, robust risk planning maybe not for all the projects. And so, as we have just mentioned, it is not necessary that all the projects will go through this quantitative risk analysis phase or on the process. Typically, large projects, typically complex projects, typically those which have a high priority and is very sensitive, those are projects that will go through quantitative risk analysis. And for this quantitative risk analysis, we will need high quality data and a lot of data. As we'll see some cases of how we do it, we'll realize that. And as we have just mentioned, it is most likely appropriate for large complex projects. Now, risk, as we have said, is uncertainty. And risk analysis is representations of uncertainty in a project. Now, in quantitative risk analysis, often models the uncertainty and models this uncertainty as a quantitative model. And that's why it is quantitative risk analysis. And it can be about duration or the schedule. It can be about the cost. It can be about the resource requirement. All these things can be uncertain. And emanating from all these sources of uncertainty, we can probably, we will be able to, through quantitative model the uncertainty at an overall level. Now, this uncertainty, a lot of times, in the quantitative risk analysis will be represented as a probability distribution. And it will probably look something like that. Now, having said that, there are many different types of probability distribution. And some of them we know are, for example, normal. The shape that we just saw was the normal distribution, but there are others like triangular, then beta distribution. So these are different shapes of the distribution that we will probably use when we are modeling the uncertainty or more looking at it as probability distribution. And again, this uncertainty, when we talk about this uncertainty, one is as probability distribution, we represent it, we try to understand, and we try to see what is happening in our project, and we try to use this probability distribution in making our decision. Another way is to take this uncertainty by alternate paths, and actually both of these we'll look at as an example. Now, alternate paths again is, we look at the uncertainty and see what can happen if this scenario takes place, what can happen if that scenario takes place, and what is the probability of that scenario A, what is the probability of scenario B, and so we can move forward towards that and use that information to make calculation or make decision based on the uncertainty. Now let's look at some of the ways we'll do it. One is simulation. Now when it's a simulation, we actually in a simulation, we try to combine effect of individual risks with other sources. So we are looking at our project and we are trying to figure out what would be the cost, let's say. And now when we are trying to figure out what will be the cost, or we have estimated the cost, or we are estimating the cost, there is an uncertainty over there. And this uncertainty can come out of many different things. Maybe in terms of resources, maybe in terms of the productivity, or so many different sources can actually results in that uncertainty. And now here in the simulation, what we do is we take all these different sources and try to understand them and try to model them in a way that we can actually make use of them. And one of the way to do it is Monte Carlo simulation. So in the Monte Carlo simulation, and it involves creating thousands of scenarios. And from the thousands of scenarios, we will actually come out of a curve based on which we'll be making a decision. Now let's look at it, how it happens, very briefly, how it works, the Monte Carlo simulation. So what happens is, we said there can be many different sources for basically the risk that we are looking at can come out of many different sources. So we find out those different inputs, different sources that is affecting the outcome. Now once we do that, based on those many different sources and their behavior, we'll create thousands of scenarios. Thousands of scenarios of what is the possibility for the outcome, final outcome. Now to do that, the way we do it is, for each scenario, we use some randomization for each of the inputs. Now, for each of the inputs, and of course, there is some rule about how we do the randomization, how we apply this randomization for each input. Now, when we do that, we have at each scenario we have the values for each of these inputs. And what we do at each scenario, we take all these inputs values of these inputs, and then determine the outcome based on our model, determine the outcome of the, or rather the final outcome based on the value of inputs for this particular scenario. This way, we create thousands and thousands of scenarios. Thousands of scenarios we create, and those thousands of scenarios will come out as a distribution, will represent the outcome as a distribution. And when we get the distribution, we can get the desired value of the outcome. So let's look at it more graphically, how it works out. So let's say in the x-axis, we are saying it is the predicted cost of project. And this is what we are interested in. And in the y-axis, we are looking at the cumulative distribution, or cumulative probability, based on the, what you call the simulation process we went through, and we got the distribution. So when we use that and plot it in as an S-curve, what we'll find is, for example, this one, it shows that there is a region of uncertainty where the predicted cost of the project can vary from somewhere between 35 million to, let's say, 63 million or something, whatever, right? And then when we look at this, we say, for example, here, this is the point in the curve which has 25% probability. Or if you look at here, it is 50% probability, and it really is, the value here is 47.2 million. So what we are really saying is, the predicted cost for this project will be 47.2 million, but there is a 50% chance, so to speak, right? And we can look at it at different points: 17% probability, cumulative probability with 44 million, or 75% probability with 50 million. So this is how we come out with the simulation, all these thousands of scenarios, put them together and come out with this probability distribution curve, which will tell us what is the range for this project, predicted cost of the project. And if you see here, essentially what we have done is we have taken in the uncertainty for all the different sources as we have identified in our project. Now there is another analysis, which is sensitivity analysis. So in sensitivity analysis, what is done is we determine which risk of sources have the most impact. Now we have found the different sources of risk, and we try to find out what has the most impact. So what we do, we see or calculate what is the correlation in outcome with variations in elements. So for each of the sources, what is the correlation in outcome? And we put them in a decreasing strength, and it comes out in a tornado shape. So it is also called sensitivity analysis, and sometimes it is also called tornado diagram. Now, it looks something like this, and if you really see, what it says is, for example, the top one that we are seeing, it has a correlation with project duration. We're talking about project duration here, risk driving project duration. And it's the top one, which is manufacture reactors. It is more than 0.5, the correlation. So it is the risk or the project duration of the project. The duration of the project is correlated to this particular risk at 0.5, with a correlation of 0.5. So similarly, you go from top to bottom, and then you can see which is has the most impact, which has the least impact, and so on. Then there is another analysis, which is decision tree analysis. Now, this decision tree analysis can be used in many different ways. And this is what we talked about, the alternate path analysis of the uncertainty. Now, we'll look at an example, but decision tree analysis, it helps in selection from alternatives. We have different alternatives, it has its different pluses and minuses, and the way it can happen, it has its own probability, how much chances it can happen. And we take that into calculation to determine what is the right option. And it is evaluated by calculating expected monetary value for each branch. So we'll talk about that a little while from now. We make this calculation, and it is really based on the mathematical expectation, which says, multiply probability by the impact, and you really get expected impact. Now, let's take an example. Let's say what we have to decide is, should we build or upgrade? Let's say we have a manufacturing plant. We have a manufacturing plant, and there is something happening in the market. There is an opportunity in the market. Based on that, we have to decide, should we build a new plant or just upgrade the existing one? So when we look at that, we have two notes, what we say. One is, if we build a new plant, we'll have to invest 120 million. And if we upgrade, we have to invest 50 million. So these are the two different decisions, and these are the two, when we take this different decision, there are two impact. Now, when we have that, to do that, how we go about it, we look at what we say the chance note. Now, it can happen. Now, we don't know about the market. It can happen, the market becomes very strong after we build a plan. Or the market will not be that strong. So at this point, from everything that we have, we see that there is 60% probability the market will be strong, and 40% probability the market will not be strong, rather fail. Now, when that happens, similarly in the upgrade, we'll see that it is what you call 60% strong demand and 40% weak demand. When we do the build new plan, if there's a strong demand, we have an earning of 200 million. If it's a weak demand, it is 90 million. Because we have built a new plan. So compared to that, the upgrade plan will have less of capacity. So even if there is a strong demand, we are not going to be able to take full advantage, and we'll have a revenue of 120 million, whereas a weak demand will give us 60 million, and that's at 40%. So then what happens is, we calculate the net value of the path. So what we are saying is, the net value of this path, or the strong demand for a build new plan, is really 80 million, which is 200 million minus 120 million. So we have a revenue of 200 million, but we have spent 120 million. That's it. Similarly, we can calculate each of them, the net path value for each of the paths. So we have 4 paths here. If you see, for the build plan, we have strong demand and weak demand. For the upgrade plan, we have strong demand and weak demand. Then we go and look at what is the expectation, mathematical expectation, or expected monetary value for the build new plan. Essentially what we do is, we look at the each of the path and apply the probability. So you see 0.6 times 80 million plus 0.4 times minus 30 million. This is what we have calculated, and we got the expected monetary value of the build new plan as 36 million. When we make the same calculation, we find out that the expected monetary value for the upgrade plan is 46 million. Again, we applied 60% probability to 70 million gain or net value path and 40% probability to $10 million net value path. And we come up with these two different numbers in terms of expected monetary value for the build new plan and expected monetary value for the upgrade plan. And when we do that, we see our decision should be with the upgrade plan, because that is giving us a larger expected monetary value, which is 46 million. So this is how we can apply the alternate path. This is how we can use the decision tree analysis in making our decision. And then there is another analysis, which is the influence diagram. Influence diagram really is a graphical way to understand the uncertainty and to decide which way we'll move forward, we should move forward. And it's represented by a set of entities, outcomes, and influences. And a lot of times, this influence diagram probably will be the first analysis that we'll do, and then you will move into more detailed numerical analysis in terms of the simulation, in terms of sensitivity analysis, and so on. So influence diagram, if you look at it, we have something called decision. Let's say here, which is a project estimates. And that is influenced by some risk condition. So it is risk condition, influenced by risk condition, and that risk condition is really some chance variable. So there will be some risk or source of risk which will influence our decision, which is the project estimates. And then this will again influence our estimates will impact the intermediate variable or the project activity we are talking about as the intermediate variable. And this project activity again will be influenced by the risk condition. And then the outcome, which is a final project deliverable, we see is influenced by the project activity, which was influenced by project estimates, and at the same time, some other sources of risk. So this is an influence diagram which shows different decisions, or risk conditions or chance variable, how they come together to influence the final outcome. And then another thing that we can do, or we'll be able to do through this quantitative risk analysis, is calculating contingency reserve. Now, we talked about contingency reserve a lot of times before, even the cost knowledge area. Now, and we said that contingency reserve is something we can put it in it will be within our schedule baseline. Now, to have it in a schedule baseline, we have to be able to calculate what is the amount that we need to put in. And this is what we'll do now, again, through expected monetary value calculation that you have done just now. So the way it'll work is like this. Let's say we have a risk A, and we found out, or we determined that risk A has a probability 0.7. And it is a probability of 0.7 or 70% probability. And the impact it will have a negative impact, which is, we are saying, minus $15,000. So the expected monetary value for this particular risk A will be, when we multiply them together, and we get minus $10,500. So that is our expected monetary value for risk A. Similarly, we'll calculate expected monetary value for risk B. And here again, same calculation tells us minus $15,000. Then there is one risk C. Again, you see these are positive numbers. Positive numbers because this is an opportunity. And we have calculated this risk C, which is a positive risk we are talking about here. And the probability is 0.05% or 0.05, which is really 5%. And the impact is pretty high in that sense, is $70,000. And so we are putting expected monetary value as 3,500, which again the same calculation, but positive here. Again, similarly, we calculate for risk D, and we come out with expected monetary value as minus 45,000. The total, when we add them up, is what we get, the number minus $67,000. So what we really do is we keep the $67,000 for this particular project as our contingency reserve to be prepared if any of these risks come up during our execution of the project. Now, this particular process, quantitative risk analysis, when we do all these different numerical analysis, it'll come up with different updates, different documents. For example, things like assessment of overall project risk exposure. This will be one of the output that we'll get out of it. Detailed probabilistic analysis of the project, and it will also tell us prioritized list of individual project risk. For example, in the individual project risk, we have probably during the qualitative risk analysis found out the priority, but through this further analysis, it'll give us a concrete list or prioritized list. It will give us trends in quantitative risk analysis results and what should be the recommended risk response, because it is based on the priority, is based on the impact, based on the probability that we will really get along or go forward with the risk responses. So coming to the risk response, our next process is planning risk response. Now let's take a stock here. What is happening is we have at this point identified the risk. We have, after identification, we have done the qualitative risk analysis, which was the first level of risk analysis. And then when we moved to the quantitative risk analysis, which gave us a deeper understanding of the risk and a more concrete way to actually go ahead and prioritize the risk. Having said that, not all the projects go through the quantitative risk analysis, only the large ones, the complex ones will typically go through the quantitative risk analysis. In any case, here, when you come here, we have quite a bit of information of each of the identified risks in terms of their probability, in terms of their impact, and what is the priority. So the planned risk response, this process, will have, again, different outputs, and we'll use different techniques or tools that we'll talk about. And the outputs there might be some changes and there will be some updates, more specifically updates to the risk register, where we'll put in what will be the responses for each of the risks. What is our response strategy or planned response for each of the risks that we have identified. Now, planned risk response, the objective of this is to address not only individual project risk that we talk about, but also the overall project exposure. So we are looking at, when we are making this plan or we are planning the risk responses, we are looking at both the individual project risk and the overall project exposure. We will look at, through this planning, we'll look at how we can minimize individual threats. How we can minimize individual threats. Basically, when it is threat, we want to minimize that, right? Because this is a negative risk. But when it is positive risk or when it is opportunities, we want to maximize those individual opportunities. So we will take a two-pronged approach. One is, if the threats we want to minimize, if there are opportunities, there, even though it's uncertain opportunity, we are calling it positive risk, we want to maximize that. And we want to reduce overall risk exposure to the project. We will also, in this planned risk response, will also put together contingency plan where required. So that will also be one of the action points when we are planning risk response. Now let's look at what are the different strategies for threats. When we're talking about threats, we are talking about the negative risk that we have identified can happen. So, and we look at each of the risks and we say, hey, okay, this is based on what we have found out for this particular risk. We will say, okay, this is the strategy we'll take. And there are different strategies that we can take. One of the strategy is to escalate. Now, we escalate. Let's say we found a threat, and what we can do outside the scope of the authority, project manager's authority, or the project scope itself. And it is not within our control what we can do, what we cannot do. And that is when we escalate this risk to a different level, maybe at a program level, maybe about portfolio level. But the important thing is here, we have to ensure that wherever or to whatever level we have escalated, they have accepted that. And after that, we don't worry about this because this is outside our scope. Then there is this threat, which is what we want to do is we want to avoid this threat. Essentially, we want to eliminate this threat altogether. And this kind of this strategy is often taken where the impact is very high, the probability is high. So, for example, maybe there is one feature in what you are trying in your project that if you implement, there will be a massive security threat. Now that is a risk. And so you might want to go talk to your users and say, hey, this is a risk. And then you might come up and say, okay, we'll not implement this feature at all. So you are totally eliminating that threat. You are avoiding, this is an avoid strategy for threats. Then there is another strategy, which is a transfer strategy. When we say transfer, we essentially shift the impact of the threat to third party. It's a bit of, and in fact, if you really think about it, we do it in our daily life. When you buy an insurance, let's say health insurance, we are transferring the risk or the cost risk that suddenly might come up, and we might not be able to handle that to someone else, to the insurance company. Of course, we have to pay some premium for that. So this is exactly what it is. So, and a good example in our project context is fixed price contract. So, for example, what can happen is you are talking to a vendor who will implement your project, and you can go through different approach when you are coming out with the contract with your vendor and what. But as a buyer, you might want to say, okay, fixed price contract, saying that, well, maybe you will charge a little more for fixed price contract, but I don't want to worry about if you will take more time, less time, and so on. And let's put a fixed price. So when you put a fixed price, you really are not affected by any variation in the project. So this is a transfer. You are shifting the impact of threat to a third party. Then another strategy for threat is mitigate. In mitigate, we reduce the probability of occurrence. We are not avoiding it completely. We are not transferring it. We are reducing the probability of occurrence. So, for example, you are engaging vendors. Now, when you're engaging vendors, there is a risk if they'll be able to provide what you need and in the way you need it. Because if they are not, then your whole project will get impacted. There is a risk over there. But then you can reduce this risk by ensuring that or do some study and ensure and look at the background and see the vendors have the track records. So in other words, you have put some effort to actually mitigate the risk. And then finally, there is this strategy which we call as accept. In this, basically what we do, our approach is, or our strategy is to accept the risk and probably keep a reserve. So there are, and for example, if we say, some kind of weather risk, right? We can probably, we don't know what if there is a hurricane, it does happen, but we'll have some reserve because of the loss we'll incur and so on. So we are not doing anything about it. We are keeping a reserve and we just accept the risk when it comes. So these are different strategies for negative risk or threats. Then there are some strategies for opportunities. The strategies for opportunities, again, one is escalate. So when we see that opportunity, the way we'll be able to exploit is not within the control of the project, is beyond the authority of the project manager. So we find at what level they'll be able to leverage this, exploit this opportunity, or recognize and take advantage of this opportunity, and we leave it to them. So that's an escalate. Exploit is basically ensuring that we realize this opportunity. So, for example, we might be employing most talented resources, available talented resources, and we are taking this to exploit the opportunity that we have because we have the talented resources, and talented resources can be very effectively used in our project to make it a high quality project with low cost. So we are exploiting so that this opportunity that we have, we are taking full advantage, and we want to ensure that we are able to get that opportunities. For example, again, maybe a technology is going to come out, and that will make a huge difference to the way we are running the project. So to exploit it, we'll go ahead and upgrade this technology, and so that we can take full advantage of that. So we are really exploiting the opportunities that is coming out. Then there is enhance. Enhance is when we are increasing the probability. Increasing the probability and maybe we'll have a chance to, or there is a penalty if we are delayed. So what we're doing is, or there's an incentive if we provide it early, so to speak. And such a case, we'll be adding more resources to actually increase the probability of delivering this before the time, to get that incentive that is there in the project if we deliver before the time. Then here is another, it is very much like transfer that we talked about, but on the other side. So let's say we have an opportunity, and we as a project, as an organization, are not able to take full advantage. We don't have the skills or bandwidth for that. So maybe we'll go in for a joint venture with another company, and we're sharing that opportunity with someone else. So that is another way, another strategy for opportunities. And finally, accept and acknowledge the existence. If it comes, well, we will take advantage of it. But we're not doing anything at this point of time, which is, for example, some new evolving technology. We don't know, but if it comes, we'll take advantage of that. So there are, again, 5 strategies for opportunities and 5 strategies for threats. And when we are talking about these strategies, we are talking about individual project risk that we have identified. But then, as we have said, besides the individual project risk, there are another category, which is the overall project risk. So now let's look at what are the different strategies for overall project risk. Now, in overall project risk, again, there is a strategy which is avoid. Avoid is, again, if there is a very high risk element in the project, we would go ahead and try to eliminate that threat altogether. For example, if it is so risky, then we might even, as an extreme case, cancel the project itself. So we are avoiding the risk altogether. So this is avoid, and it also depends on if it's very high risk and very high impact, and it doesn't give a lot of value, then we have to think about canceling the project. Or maybe a feature, very high risk, very high impact because of this feature, but that particular feature is an issue it's not going to give a lot of benefit, then we might actually take that feature out of the project. Then exploit. Exploit, again, we'll focus our action to capture positive effect at every level. For example, adding high benefit scope to add value to stakeholders. And so at this project level, we'll try to exploit and see, now we are not talking about the individual project risk, we're talking about the project level, overall project level, and we'll see at the project level, what are the different ways we can actually capture the positive effect. Transfer share, again, when the risk cannot be absorbed effectively by the organization, like a joint venture we talked about. But again, the same concept applied at an overall project level. And mitigate enhance, again, the same concept, changing the level of overall risk, project risk, basically changing the scope of the project, for example. So essentially, we are applying the same technique at a project level. And finally, accept strategy for overall project risk. For example, contingency reserve. So we'll talk about that in a little while. Contingency reserve, well, we talked about, and that is, and we saw that $67,000, and that is really an accept strategy, because we are acknowledging those risks, and then we are putting up a contingency reserve. Now there is this contingency response strategy that we will think of when we are making risk response planning risk response. Now this contingency response is really fallback plans for worst case scenarios. And if something really drastic happens, something doesn't really work out according to the plan, what is our plan? And that happens when certain events, let's say, occur and under certain predefined condition and maybe triggered by some event. For example, when we are planning for this project, we said we'll execute when we go and roll out. Now, when we are rolling out, there is an existing, let's say there is an existing system that is being replaced. And so what we say is, if we are, for example, go ahead and implement this and something doesn't work at all, what we do? We would probably take a backup for everything so that we can roll back immediately if what we are rolling out doesn't work out or there is an issue with what we are rolling out. So it is our fallback plan, or if it is our contingency response. As an output to this planned response, we'll be updating risk register. We'll be updating risk register and with response strategies. So we talked about different strategies, and we talked about the strategy for threat. We talked about strategies for opportunities, for overall projects. So we'll update our risk register with that, and specific action to implement the chosen strategy. What will we really do exactly when we based on the strategy that we have opted? If there are triggers, warning signs, conditions that needs to be, that will tell us when we want to initiate that action, specific action, right? And what kind of budget and schedule to implement this chosen response. We talked about contingency plan. We'll also update the risk register with what will be our different contingency plan for different events. And that is really the fallback plan. And then we'll also talk about residual risk. Residual risk is when we are implementing a response, maybe the total risk is not avoided, or even after that, there might be still some risk that is remaining. And that is called the residual risk. And for example, as opposed to residual risk, we'll also talk about secondary risk, which is really, secondary risk is when we implement a risk, or we have identified a risk or a plan for a response. When we implement that response, this gives rise to some other risk. So that is what is known as secondary risk. So with this, we have planned for the risk, planned risk response based on the risk analysis, quantitative and qualitative risk analysis that we have done. Now we are ready to implement those risk response. So if you remember, this implement risk response process is in the executing process group. So what we are going to do during the execution, we will keep an eye on what are the risks, responses we talked about, what are the different risks, what are the responses we talked about, and when something gets triggered based on what triggers we have identified for each of the risks, we'll go ahead and implement them. The process that is involved is project management plan, document, environmental factors, and again, expert judgment, interpersonal skills, and PMIS. PMIS is the project management information system, and there will be change request part. Because risk has been identified and we raise a change request to get that done. So what we really do here, we ensure agreed upon responses are executed. So when we find something, a risk is surfacing, we go and see what is the plan and apply or implement that particular plan. when we do this, we look at both the overall project risk exposure and individual risk, and this is performed throughout the project. So we have to keep an eye on what are the risks that we have actually identified, what are the plan, and whenever at any point in the project when we come across this, when we come across this risk, we will apply those responses as we have planned. We will use project management information system because this will include schedule, resource, cost to ensure risk plan and activities are integrated. So we look at it in total perspective, and when we do that, we will employ our project management information system, because that will be able to tell us, for example, if it's a schedule risk, it will be able to tell us that are we getting delayed or are we going to get delayed, and then probably it will help us identify what is making us delay, what risk is there. For example, if it gets delayed, what other effect is there? So the total integrated picture we can expect to understand when we use the project management information system, which is not necessarily one system, but maybe a different system put together that is being used during the project management. And then, as we have said before, as a project manager, when we are doing an execution, when we are implementing our project, we are executing, we have two hats. On one hat will be our execution hat that we talk about, and in this particular case, when the execution hat is the implementing risk response. But at the same time, we'll have another hat, which is the monetary risk. And this monetary risk will look out for if there is any gap, the way we are implementing, is it according to the plan? So that's the idea of the monitoring. So this particular process, again, will have project management plan, risk register, and it will have different tools and different updates in terms of project management plan, documents, and change requests as well. So monitor risk will monitor implementation of agreed upon risk response plan. So in other words, in this particular process, we keep an eye on the planning that we have done, or when there has been a risk, and the implementation that you have done, is it according to the plan? And you will be surprised, in many projects, there are plans are made, but the way it is actually done, or how some of the risks are actually addressed, the plan is not consulted. So that is a problem. So we want to, because we have put so much of thought, so much of discussion, so much of expert knowledge in the plan, we want to also ensure that we are using the plan when we are actually addressing any kind of risk. And we will identify this when you're monitoring. So in other words, all this risk that we have identified, we'll track them. Track them in terms of, is it getting triggered? Is it relevant anymore? So all these things will track. And not only that, when we implement a risk or response, we want to also see if there is any residual risk that we talk about. If, for example, we have not addressed the risk in its entirety and there is still some risk left, then we want to monitor those residual risks. In monitoring, we'll also keep an eye on if there are new risks that are surfacing. Because if there are new risks that are surfacing, we would again take this as a new risk. We'll go through the qualitative risk analysis. If required, we go through the quantitative risk analysis. We have to come out with the risk plan, response plan, and put it in the risk register. So, and new risk can come up anytime, because the environment keeps on changing, internal environment, external environment, and because of that, new risk can be there anytime. And so as part of the monitoring process, we'll have to ensure that we are identifying new risks. And and as well, now this monitoring risks, or this particular process, not only ensures monitoring for each individual risk plan or risk strategies or each risk, it also looks at the effectiveness of the risk process as a whole, so that if there is a gap, that risk process can be changed, and so the next round or this risk methodology is applied will be at a higher level. So as a result, when we are evaluating effectiveness of risk process, as a result, it achieves continuously optimized risk responses. So that is again another objective here. So this will be our monitoring risk. Some of the data analysis that we'll be looking at is technical perform analysis, we call, say. Basically, we are comparing the technical performance, right? Which is, for example, weight, transaction time, number of data, etc. But again, the technical performance, when we are comparing in technical performance analysis, when we are monitoring risk, this will depend from project to project, industry to industry, and so on. It's very project. It will be based on the context of the project. But whatever definition we take, it should be objective and measurable. And then the other analysis that we'll do is reserve analysis. Reserve analysis, we have kept contingency reserves to address risks that we have talked about. And whenever a risk has surfaced, gets triggered, and we apply the contingency reserve, we have to keep a record of how much we have consumed from the contingency reserve. And if there is enough remaining for the remaining risks that we have identified and that are still active. So that is really the reserve analysis. So with this, we have finished this particular process as well as this particular knowledge area. And tomorrow we'll get into project procurement management. Thank you for being with me today. And I'll be